Cooking with Ken. I am Chef Mark, and today we are going to be cooking with sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes 3 ways, because there's a lot that you can get out of this one little tuber. And of course, before we get started on doing anything, all of our produce has to be washed, especially in these times of COVID. So these sweet potatoes I called tubers earlier, just like regular potatoes. These are just root vegetables that grow deep in the ground and kind of elongate themselves, hence the term tubers. It becomes tube-like. And these particularly are also called corms, or parts of the root that function to absorb water and hold lots of starches. For a sweet potato, I'm going to get diced, and we are going to make this a southwestern flavored sweet potato for a rice bowl we're going to make. So starting getting these weird tapered ends sliced off. Create a flat surface to lay my sweet potato down. Sweet potato is a very thick, very hearty vegetable, so take your time cutting this. You're at home or not in a restaurant trying to impress Gordon Ramsay. Work at your own pace. Be safe. There we go. And the size of dice I'm getting these potatoes to isn't a prerequisite by any means. You can always go larger or even smaller if that's what you prefer. It's all about meeting your personal taste. I'm not too partial to having really large chunks of sweet potatoes to chew on. Get all this into a bowl. In this bowl here, I have chili powder and cumin. These are 2 integral spices to conjuring those very strong Mexican and southwestern flavors we think of, especially cumin being that sort of almost elusive spice that you can't quite place your tongue on, but you know is what all tacos taste like. So we're just going to add about a teaspoon of cumin and a half tablespoon or 1.5 teaspoons of chili powder. Right to my potatoes. Drizzle a little oil on these. And of course, nothing is ever truly seasoned without salt. Just kind of do that to your own personal taste, your own personal needs. Add about a teaspoon of salt there. I'm just going to, by hand, get this sweet potato well coated in these spices. Oil is going to help with that coating, and also help, of course, prevent sticking to our pan later. And already these smell fantastic. These spices are very potent, very aromatic. We'll have the kitchen smelling good in no time. Here we go. So, I just preset my oven to 425 degrees. And while that's coming to temp, I'm going to turn my attention to my Spanish rice. So, very similar to what I just put on the sweet potatoes. Here I have, again, about a teaspoon of cumin, a teaspoon of chili powder, 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper, and half a teaspoon each of onion powder and garlic powder. All that's going to go right into the saucepan. Stir that really well. Really break up those clumps of spices if you have them. Of course, a little salt. And get this turned on to high heat. Now I've got my saucepan on high heat. I'm going to get it covered and just bring that to a boil. After that's reached a boiling point, I'm going to lower the temperature and let our rice finish by simmering out. Always want to get it up to temp and then let it finish cooking at a lower temperature. Otherwise, we're going to very easily scorch your rice. Now, I've got my Spanish rice going. I've got my sweet potatoes seasoned with my Southwest spice blend and set aside. I have another sweet potato that's going to get diced just like that one and go into the oven as well. But this one is going to be for a breakfast hash made with sweet potato and apples. Again, cutting our tapered ends of our sweet potatoes. Now, I can't stress enough, take your time cutting anything as dense as this, or butternut squash, any other kind of really dense vegetables. Especially if you have a duller knife, the more force you're putting into it is just increasing the likelihood you're going to cut yourself, and it's best to just take your time to avoid that happening. Sometimes it's inevitable, but if it can be predicted, it can be prevented. Sweet potato number 2 going into a bowl as well. Next up for my sweet potato hash, I've got half an onion here. I'm also going to dice. And this part is something that I say can very much be omitted. Some people don't like the taste of onion and accompaniment with apples or potatoes, or some people just don't like onion at all. But I very much love it. Onions are very good for us. I love to add alliums to my food wherever I can. And also just helps to bulk up. Alliums are just all of our onions, garlics, leeks, things in that family. We all call alliums. So again, with this dice on my onion, I've made several horizontal incisions here that you can see, followed by these vertical cuts. And just like that, onion dices come out like a breeze. And these we are going to get coated in some oil, salt, and pepper. No other kind of spices, just salt and pepper here. Yes. I'm always doing just a very light drizzle of oil. I'm not trying to really saturate what I'm making here. I don't want a really fatty, greasy potato to come out of the oven. No salt. So you heard me mention before that I'm also adding apple to this hash. That is not going to roast with my sweet potatoes. That is instead going to get cooked on the flat top. I'm going to saute that until I've got some nice caramelization on the outside, but I still want some firmness to the apple. I still want to have a little bit of bite to it. I don't want very mushy apples. I'm not making apple pie here. But also, maybe that's something you prefer. Maybe you prefer a softer texture, or maybe you need something softer to chew. But whatever you need or prefer, make it your way. Now, as I said before, you can make it how you want. Just be aware that the apple and potato do not have the same composition or texture. This is much less hardened than that sweet potato is. It's going to cook so much faster. That's something to be very wary of if you do decide to roast it. Possibly even roast it separate just so you can keep an eye on it and pull it if it's done in advance of the sweet potato. Let's get this apple diced. Just cut around the core. Discard my core. Actually, I've got my rice boiling over here now. Let me reduce this temperature. Ooh, that smells good. Already smells like a taco joint up in here. Apples, dicing very similar to the sweet potato, trying to keep the size as even as possible. I'm not ready to saute my apples immediately. I'd rather them come off the pan hot at the same time my sweet potato is coming out of the oven. So I'm going to get that into a bowl and submerge it in some cold water for the time being. And I'm ready to saute that off. I'll come back to it. Now apples, after they've been cut and this center flesh has been exposed, they start to turn brown or oxidize. That means they're interacting with the oxygen naturally in the air and turning that kind of ochre color that's kind of not so appetizing to look at. So to prevent that, use cold water. You can use a little bit of salt. And most commonly, people introduce some sort of acid to this, like lemon juice, lime juice, orange, vinegar, whatever you like. A root of cold water and a little salt. It's about 1/8 of a teaspoon, not very much at all. Not trying to brine my apples. There we go. Our oven has sounded that it is preheated and ready to go. Let's get our potatoes on trays. Let's spread them out so there's opportunity for everybody to crisp a little in the oven. We don't want anything to just steam together and get a kind of mushy potato, or maybe you do. But that's how I prefer to make my potatoes. Now these potatoes are going in for about 15 minutes. And as I always do whenever I'm baking anything in the oven, about halfway through, so at about the 7-minute or 8-minute mark, I'm going to get back in this oven, rotate my pans, and because I have 2 pans and I'm even going to switch levels on them, just to make sure everything's baking evenly. Now I've got food in the oven, a little time to spare while I wait on it to cook. And I want to take this time to talk about our sweet potatoes and how it compares to your standard russet potato, red skin, Idaho, gold dust, whatever other potato you may be used to. Now, this sweet potato is not very different in its raw form from a regular potato. They have very similar nutrient contents, very similar makeups, but it's when you start to cook them that the changes differ. Sweet potatoes, as the name implies, have much more sugar, about 14 times as much sugar as a standard potato does. But of course, these are all natural sugars occurring in the plant, not any added sugars that you ought to be worried about. And they also have less starch. So a standard potato, russet, Idaho, whatever, has about 2 times the starch you find in your standard sweet potato. As we get down to the micronutrients, there are still nutrients that one has over the other, and sweet potato is particularly rich in vitamin C, iron, calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus, while standard potatoes are much higher in potassium, vitamin B1, and folic acid. I mentioned earlier that the regular potato had twice the starch of a sweet potato, but it doesn't come in first for a calorie count. That place actually belongs to the sweet potato. Alright, we're at the halfway mark. Just getting all my potato trays rotated and switched around in the oven. Smells beautifully in here. Now Spanish rice is nearing completion. It's just beginning to bubble right at the surface of the rice. I'm not going to bother stirring it at all. You always want to leave the rice undisturbed. Let it finish steaming all the way. Kill the heat a little prematurely because even though there may be some water in there still, it's going to consistently be steaming out and evaporating from the pan, and the rice is also going to absorb. Now the rice is done and my potatoes are nearing completion. I'm going to go ahead and work on my apples. Let's get these drained off. Get my saute pan here. Put it at medium-high heat. Because I just want to get the outside of this apple cooked and cooked well, but not so much the inside. And always, cold food goes into a hot pan, so let that pan sit there a minute. Let it get really hot. There we go. There's a little moisture still on my fingers from draining the apples off. I hear an immediate sizzle when my fingers touch. With my pan hot, I'm going to go ahead and drizzle in a little oil. Just enough to coat the pan. You don't want to be using lots of oil, especially because you have something that just came out of water and has a pretty high water content itself. That's going to cause a lot of splatter. Anytime you see any water and oil mixing, those two, once the oil gets hot, will just splatter and splatter. You'll get burns all up and down your arms, hands, and it's just not going to be pretty for you. Good immediate sizzle. And to make sure I get the kind of caramelization I want on these apples, I'm not going to consistently stir these. I'm going to allow it to sit now that I've got it coated in the oil of the pan, and just caramelize on one good side. Come back in about 2 minutes, give them another good flip, let them sit again, and take them off the heat. And by the time those are off the heat, our potatoes should also be coming out of the oven. There we go. We zoom in there, you can see that coloration I was talking about before. I'll let those be. Kill the heat on them. Because again, I'm just getting color on the outside. I'm not trying to cook them all the way through. And here in this about 2 minutes or less, my potatoes are going to come out of the oven. And these are all going to get assembled. Much less than 2 minutes. Let's get these sweet potatoes out of the oven. Always pull it off and give it a taste test. Excellent. I get all my potatoes off this pan into this bowl. Don't do this at home. Use a tool to scrape with. I'm just taking my hand and brushing them all to the corner. Make it less likely for potatoes to spill. Excellent. Now getting our apples added in. Just give these guys a stir together. And just like that, we've knocked out our sweet potato and apple hash. Now this doesn't have to be the final version for you. When you serve this for yourself or your family, you can include bacon on the side, sausage, any sort of meat alternative, turkey, whatever. You could even add, of course, eggs on top, fried, scrambled, poached, however you like them. Make it your way. This is just the beginnings, the bare bones, to give you something, a template to work off of. Southwest potatoes done nicely. Very crisp on the outside too. So my rice here, I just gave a quick taste test, and it's not quite done. Something all good chefs ought to be doing as they cook is consistently tasting their food, make sure it's as done as you want it to be. My rice, I just added about another cup of water to, so I've now added about 3 cups of water to 1 cup of rice, and that should get me where I'm looking to be. But in the meantime, I'm going to finish out my Southwest sweet potato rice bowl. I got my pan back on the stove here, getting it on medium-high heat. And while that's heating, I'm going to get my bell pepper here, washed and cut. Now the bell pepper here, like most things I mentioned is completely optional choice. I choose to add bell pepper to my bowl because I mentioned earlier the sweet potato has iron in it, and while it does have some vitamin C in it, I also want to add the vitamin C of a bell pepper, that the sweet potato contains iron and vitamin C in it. But iron, when it comes from plants, comes in a form called non-HEME iron, and that form is more difficult for our bodies to break down and process and fully absorb. So the addition of vitamin C, whenever you have any kind of iron in a meal, helps by becoming a catalyst and making it much easier and faster for your body to intake that iron. Let's get all the lobes of my bell peppers sliced off. Always use that bottom part. Waste no pepper. And at this point, you can cut the peppers how you want, whether that be a julienne or these strips of bell pepper. I'm going to try and get some squares out of mine. Now the reason I'm cutting these bell peppers in squares like this is that when I've cooked everything up for my Southwest bowl, everything's going to be kept separate. My corn will not mix with my peppers, they will not mix with my beans, nothing is going to mix together. So that if I want, any of those individual components can become something else if I decide I'm sick of Southwest bowls, or maybe I don't have ingredients for it. So if I decide I want to stir fry, that I want to use my bell peppers for another purpose, my corn for something else, my black beans for anything else, stir fries, frittatas, fajitas, whatever it is you've got going on in your kitchen, you have that option. It's not all mixed together and has to be for one singular purpose. Now my pan's sufficiently hot here. Let's go ahead and get our oil drizzled in. There we go. Already getting some smoke off of it immediately. That's something I actually really like for doing things like this for Mexican, Southwestern foods. Get a little more char on them. You can already see I'm starting to get some colorization, some blistering on my peppers. That's exactly what I want. And that comes from cooking on high or medium-high heat. It looks like my rice is done for the second time. Get that uncovered and let her steam out. These are probably going to cook for about 2 to 3 minutes. Come out of the pan. I'm going to rapidly follow with my corn. That'll leave the pan. Finish the black beans, and I'm done with the bowl. Those have gone about as far as I want them to go. Get these in a can, set aside. Follow up with corn. Now the corn I have here is just canned super sweet corn from Kroger. No less healthy for you than your standard shelf fresh ears of corn. It's just been sat in a brine so that while it's canned, it can stay on your shelf for years at a time. Now because it's a sweet corn and I'm not as partial to the sweetness of it, I'm going to salt this one just to contrast from that sweetness a little. a little cracked pepper. Now, I've got canned corn here. There are people that may tell you that frozen corn is actually better or healthier than canned corn. Well, that's sort of true. It's only about marginally true because that corn is getting harvested fresh out of the field and immediately frozen. It doesn't have any time for nutrients to degrade. And what I mean is, anytime you take a plant, your fruit or your vegetable, off of its main body, you begin to lose nutrients immediately. And the longer it stays warm at room temperature, the longer it's going to be degrading, losing those nutrients, and eventually start rotting. When you freeze foods, they become sort of frozen in time, so to speak. They cease to degrade, they're perfectly preserved, only with an exception of a few cells bursting here and there, discoloring, but still perfectly edible foods. Corn's nice and hot. So get this out of the pan. Now we're going to get our beans cooked off. Frijoles negros. There's our Spanish for the day. Frijoles negros, black beans. These aren't going to take long to cook at all. And let me have a taste of my rice to see if it's done while I'm waiting. Yes, perfectly done, cooked through Spanish rice. Again, that's 3 cups of water to 1 cup of rice. And in this particular instance, I am using brown rice. Be sure to do any research on what kind of rice you're using. All rices are not made equal and will cook differently. Make sure you're cooking as per instructions to yours. These beans are just about done. I'm going to go ahead and start plating up my Southwest rice bowl. Kill the heat on this. On the bed of my Spanish rice. Bell peppers. Corn. Our sweet potatoes. Last but not least, our black beans. And there we have our finished Southwest bowl. Again, feel free to add anything else you like to this. Feel free to remove items or substitute items if you like. Again, eggs, proteins, meat substitutes, sky's the limit. Do you? So this bowl, I'm going to enjoy just as is, but it doesn't have to stop in this form. You can make it like a burrito or a wrap, get you a nice sized tortilla, roll it up well, snack on that. For now, let's bite into this. Try and get a little bit of everything. So good. It's a beautiful mixture of flavors. That iconic taco seasoning spice from the cumin and our chili powder coming through beautifully. The char and our bell peppers adding a little bit of smokiness to all of this. And that salt and pepper and all the other elements here just mellowing out the sweetness of that corn so it's not detracting so much from everything else. And this is a really good, wholesome and healthy meal. and up. So I've gotten my apple and sweet potato hash done. I've made my Southwest sweet potato and rice bowl. Now let's get to work on my sweet potato cream sauce. I'm going to start by getting my sweet potato peeled. I'm going to be blending this potato, so I don't need any skin that's going to stick around in the sauce and add any sort of texture to it. I want a smooth, creamy sauce. I want it all homogeneous, no kind of grittiness. I'm using a Y vegetable peeler. It just gets the name from the sort of Y-shaped head. You may use a different kind of peeler, the standard linear peeler that you would just brush this with at home. I like these just because I feel they're a little bit faster to use. I can just sit here and all day repeat this back and forth motion. As to with the linear peelers, you've got a little less that you're able to do. Actually, just because there are spots like here, little brown flecks that you might not be able to get to because of all the ridges and dips in the potato. It's amorphous, doesn't hold a whole shape. Well, holds a whole shape, just not a geometric one. It's organic. Now this is going into compost for us. If you have compost at home, do that. If you don't have compost, start a compost bin. Let your vegetables break down. Fertilize your plants next year. Get this potato sliced into some thin rounds to start. I'm cutting thin because I want these to cook quickly. I'm going to be cooking these in milk, so they'll be immersed in dairy, which scorches much more easily. And I want to prevent that from happening, so the less time these potatoes have to cook, the less of a chance I have of scalding my milk. Maybe quarter these. Just make this take as little time as possible. And with my 1 small sweet potato, I'm going to add 1 cup of whole milk. Now, the milk type isn't something you need to be so worried about. I use whole milk because of the higher fat content. I like that, and for a creamy sauce, that fat is going to make it that much smoother, that much richer, that much creamier for me. On medium heat. Again, this is a dairy item. I don't want to use really high heat, so keep a close eye on your flame. I'm just going to make sure all my potatoes are submerged in the milk. They don't have to be perfectly so, because as they cook and break down, it'll be easy to force them under it. And again, these are going to get blended up, so not super worried about that. Just keeping them submerged as I can. Covering that up. And this is going to heat for about 10 to 15 minutes. I'm going to come back in a moment with a fork to test the tenderness of the potatoes. And if it goes cleanly through with no resistance, then my potatoes are done and we're ready to blend the sauce up. We've got our milk boiling here. Sweet potatoes are looking like they've cooked down enough. Let's give them the fork test and see. Oh yes, absolutely went straight through and is threatening to break apart on me. That's good. We can go ahead and kill the heat there. It's time to blend. Now, in addition to our milk and sweet potatoes here, I've got just 4 small cloves of garlic that are going to get blended up with those. A little extra flavor. Just another layer. Now, it probably wasn't necessary for me to blend it that long, but I always go a little extra to make sure I've got a completely smooth blend. And look at that, beautiful result. Perfectly smooth. The milk and potato are now indistinguishable from each other. That's all going right back into my saucepan here. Nice and thick. And to this, I'm going to get half a cup of grated Parmesan added. There we go. Now, this cheese I'm going to get melted down, but as the cheese cools the way cheese naturally wants to, it's going to try to solidify, and our sauce is going to get much thicker. So to keep this thin and from congealing too much, we're going to add a little more milk. I'm just going to add in about another half cup. And turn this on medium heat. I just need to melt my Parmesan. My sauce is still hot from the blender. I'm just letting that Parmesan melt in. Add a little bit of salt. In about 3 to 5 minutes, our parm should be completely melted and integrated in our sauce, and we'll be done here. Sauce is still looking fairly thick. I'm going to add another half cup of milk just to be on the safe side. And it never hurts to make a little extra sauce. That's more sauce you have for later, right? Ooh, that volcanic action. Now, I've been constantly stirring this just because, again, I have dairy in here, and I've just added more dairy. The cheese is just going to make this that much more likely to scorch on the bottom of my pan. So again, constant stirring. Do not burn your dairy for anything. Once it scorches on the bottom of the pan, that flavor permeates throughout your entire product. Even if you pour all this out of the pot, you will still taste that burn with it separated from it. Just going to give this a taste test. There's a nice mellow nutty and sweetness coming from the sweet potato. And that parm in there. This adds a nice little bit of saltiness so I don't have to add as much salt myself. Tastes beautifully. It's nice and smooth on the mouth. So let's go ahead and kill the heat here. So I've got some whole wheat penne that I've already cooked off here. I'm going to get some into a bowl. Pour my sweet potato sauce right over. And if you like, a little more parm. Now again, this does not have to be the finished product. As with just about any pastas, you can add all sorts of vegetables, meats. Take it as far as you can make it go. Let's get into this. Even sounds good. Now don't be put off by the sauce starting to look and be a little gritty. That's going to be natural from the added Parmesan. This is very good. I'll probably eat this as is. Alright guys, thank you for joining us. I am Chef Mark and this has been Cooking with Ken. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have anything you'd like to see us make in the future, feel free to comment. Until next time, I'll be enjoying this pasta.